guys, welcome to another episode of The Floor is Yours. Today we have five more debaters with us today. We have joining us as guest judge Arth Agarwal. Arth, thank you for coming back. I will be a moderator as well as Arth's co-judge. So the motion standing before the House today is this House believes that rehabilitation should be the only consideration in a criminal sentencing. Our speakers today are Pushkar Pandey, Arithro Mukherjee, Arth Agarwal, Ayon Basu, Nirupam Biswas, as well as Ishan Banerjee, who often judges with me, but he will today be serving as a debater. Now, that being said, each speaker will have 4 minutes on the clock. We will be starting with, of course, the first speaker of the proposition, which is Ishan Banerjee. Ishan, are you with us?
I am with you,
Right.
but it was decided that I would be
Okay. So first speaker is Arithro. So yeah,
All right, Arithro. My apologies. Right, Arithro, you have 4 minutes on the clock. You may begin.
Good evening, members of the House. Now, before we move on with the debate, may the members of the House please take note. There are four things which essentially go into consideration when we speak of this debate: retribution, rehabilitation, deterrence, and capital punishment. These are the four things which we first think of when we speak of the entire process of prosecution, right? Now, the burden today for the proposition we have here is to prove that rehabilitation is not only the most important factor in criminal sentencing, but the only important factor in today's motion specifically. Now, before I move on, members of the House, let me define rehabilitation for the benefit of the House. Rehabilitation is the idea of reforming a prisoner so that they can reintegrate back into society upon their release. Now, this process involves various programs, including anger management, education programs, even creative workshops to form another outlet for expression. There are moral recognition, there's moral recognition therapy, there is reasoning and rehabilitation, there is cognitive behavioral treatment, there is surgical treatment for sex offenders, there is MST for juveniles, there are drug courts, there is drug treatments for community. There is essentially every possible aspect of crimes covered under this specific motion. Now, covered under rehabilitation, to be more specific. Now, it is hoped through these processes that they will become less inclined to commit these crimes in the future. Now, what the proposition means to say over here is it seeks to prevent a person from reoffending by taking away the desire to offend, quite frankly, in itself. Now, let me clarify something to those present in the House. This process of rehabilitation is very, very, very different from the idea of deterrence, incapacitation, and deterrence, incapacitation, and retribution. Now, when we speak today, deterrence, which is the idea of making him afraid to offend, though he may still desire to, and the idea of incapacitation, which is the idea of taking away his physical power to offend, though he still may desire to and be unafraid to offend, where these two come only for cases of aggravated crimes and has the power of the judgment is already fixed for such crimes, where it is either a full prison sentence or there is a life.
Right, I think Arithro is having some connectivity issues. So what we'll do is, for now, because we cannot communicate with him, we'll be moving on to the next speaker because we can't ask him questions either. So Arth, for your note as well, he had 1 minute and 15 seconds remaining. So maybe we'll give him time later in the debate to finish off what he was talking about. Okay, right. Arithro, you're back.
Yeah.
Right. So Arithro, we lost you when you had about 1 minute and 15 seconds remaining in your speech. So do you want to resume from where you were, or?
Yeah. Could you give me an idea of where I got cut off?
Right.
Right. That's not a problem, Arithro. You can start from where you stopped. Or start from where you were talking about this is not the actual idea of rehabilitation people have. Perhaps that would be better because we can have
Yeah.
a clear-cut understanding of your argument from that point in time. So
Right.
if you
Yeah.
Now,
Right.
members of the House, Now, members of the House, this is very, very different from the idea of deterrence, incapacitation, and retribution. Now, deterrence is the idea of making the criminal so afraid to offend that he may, of making him afraid to offend, though he may still desire to. And the idea of incapacitation is taking away his physical ability to offend altogether. Now, members of the House, when these two come into play, these are in cases of aggravated crime where the judgment is already fixed in stone. It is either life imprisonment or it is death penalty, or beheading in case of the Middle East. Now, members of the House, in cases like this, the judgment is already fixed and the judge cannot partake in criminal sentencing. And therefore, these do not come into play in today's motions. Similarly, in the idea of retribution, the retributive idea is that the punishment should be determined chiefly by the seriousness of the crime itself and not by the consequential factors. Now, members of the House, again, this does not fall under the ambit of today's debate, because very simply the judgment for this is already fixed in stone and the choice of criminal sentencing doesn't come into today's motion if you consider these aspects. This leaves us with the third factor, which is the notion of rehabilitation. Now, rehabilitation strategies attempt to change the individual offender's
Sorry to
behavior.
wrap up, please.
Yes. Now, these strategies essentially attempt to change the way the criminal offenders think, and Canada had conducted severe strategies between 1980s and 1990s with a success rate of between 46% and 86%.
Right. Arthur, I think we got your point. I'll have to stop you there. Right. So thank you for your speech. We'll be taking a maximum of 2 questions, followed by a question from Arthur myself if we have one. So is there anyone with a question to Orithro as of now?
You can use the raise hand feature if you have a question.
Yeah. Is there anyone with a question? Right. Seeing as there are none, Arth, do you have a question or shall we move on?
We shall move on. I believe.
Right. Fair enough. So seeing as there are none.
Also, just a note to the participants, the moment you leave out the avenue for questions, the speaker gets marked full on rebuttal. So that's there. You definitely don't get marks for asking questions. You get marks for answering questions, but when you don't ask questions, we assume that the speech of the speaker was flawless, which is why you couldn't pose any questions to the speaker. Thank you. I just wanted to bring that to the notice of all debaters today.
Right. Arth, we had a question in the chat. Are speakers, would you allow speakers from the same side to ask each other questions?
Yeah, but from next speaker onwards, because the marking for this speaker has been concluded.
Yeah, right. Fair enough.
But just a second, but this was not clarified in the beginning, right? Like I thought
right.
we were following the conventional procedure.
No, which conventional procedure tells you that the same side cannot ask the question?
Oxford debating.
Do we follow Oxford debating here? And was it like, do you have any rules per se, Suryansh? Because you would have asked, if you actually wanted to ask a question, you would have asked it before, right? So you asked when I said that the person got marked full. So which clearly shows that you are not questioning for the sake of...
Because I thought the same side could not question.
It clearly shows that you're not questioning for the sake of the argument, but you're questioning for the sake of marks here. So I don't think that really makes... Okay, but yeah, since this was a mistake on the clarification aspect, I think Suryansh, we can allow...
Yeah, it's fine. Ishan, it's fine. Why don't we'll take his question for the purpose of debate anyway. So
If you do want to take the question later, we can take it later.
No,
so
it's
we
fine,
can
it's fine.
proceed.
Ishan, if you have a question with you, why don't you go ahead?
Right. So, Orithro. Right now,
Right.
what makes you feel that when you are facilitating rehabilitation, what makes you feel that when a person comes out of prison, he is a hardened criminal, and what makes you think that the reintegration process into the society would be a successful one, without understanding whether the society's texture is so or not?
Sir, these rehabilitation processes are of very, very different sorts. And the main purpose of these rehabilitation processes are to make the prisoner fit for society again, are so that the prisoner becomes a functioning member of the economy again. And that is with the purpose with which these rehabilitation programs function. They function within prison itself, they function outside prisons, they can be used as a criminal sentence itself. Now, members of the House, when such a process is undergone, there have been several studies undertaken by several countries which have already shown the success rate it has on the psychological aspect. The criminal then feels that he has been given a second chance. The will to commit crimes is taken away via these rehabilitation processes. And therefore, the criminal is thus once again fit to blend into the texture of society, as you so pointed out.
Right. Fair enough. Thank you for the response. Arth, do you have a question or shall we move on?
We shall move on because like we have already killed a lot of time. So yeah.
Right. Fair enough. So that in mind, we'll now be moving forward with the first speaker of side opposition. I believe that is Pushkar Pandey. Pushkar, it's your first time here. Welcome. Uh, so,
I thought I was the first speaker of the opposition.
The order was changed in case that
all
wasn't
right.
clarified.
If the order was changed, we'll okay, fine. If it's Ion, we'll take you. We'll take you next. So, Ion, you have 4 minutes.
Am I visible and audible?
Yes, you are both visible and audible, Ion. That in mind, you may begin.
Ladies and gentlemen of the House, we have gathered here today to debate on whether rehabilitation is an option or an obligation in response to criminal behavior under the motion that this House believes that rehabilitation should be the only consideration in criminal sentencing. I would like the House to focus on the term only. Now, as the principal speaker of the opposition, I shall argue that it's merely an option and should not be forced upon the criminal justice system. Before getting into the arguments, I'd like to clarify that I do not debate against the elimination of rehabilitation as a solution to criminal behavior. I simply implore the House to consider using it selectively. Starting off, rehabilitation isn't a surefire method. While some methods work with some offenders, quite a few do not. Most of these programs aren't effective enough to oppose recidivistic tendencies in these criminals. For example, in Britain, where rehabilitation has long been purported to stop reoffending, 58% of people above 21 find themselves in trouble with the law within 2 years of their release. Also, psychopathic criminals have been observed to be immune to effects of rehabilitation. Psychopaths have an inability to learn from past mistakes and gain satisfaction through their antisocial behavior and lack remorse for their actions. Findings published by BBC News indicate that psychopathic prisoners have a 2.5 times higher probability of being released from jail than undiagnosed ones, in spite of their higher likeliness to recidivate. This is simply because of the general charming attitudes of these patients. Now, if these people were to be rehabilitated and released back into society, can the House comprehend the amount of havoc they could possibly wreak, given their natural affinity towards gratification from criminal, sexual, or aggressive impulses? By arguing in their favor, does the proposition essentially imply that it has no care or concern for these possible consequences, especially given the fact that these people have already been in jail for some crime? Going back to the motion, how then can the proposition possibly argue that rehabilitation should be the sole consideration in criminal sentencing? Leading on from this point is the fact that it is virtually impossible to verify the effectiveness of such programs, even for non-psychopathic patients, until after they have been released and have actually given in to recidivism. How would we check if this system is really working? What credible methods does the proposition propose to ensure that these people do not return to their previous life? And how shall we feasibly enforce these methods, if any? Once again, going back to the motion, how then would we ensure the security and safety of the rest of society by solely and indiscriminately rehabilitating criminals? I would just request the House to ponder these questions and thank it for its valuable time. Thank you.
Right, with 40 seconds left in your speech, thank you very much, Ion. We'll be taking 2 questions on a speech. Orithro already had his hands raised, so we'll take Orithro's question followed by Ishan. Orithro, you may proceed.
Sir,
Also,
you
guys, don't literally raise your hand. Use the hand raise feature. Anyway, so Audito,
Right.
you can ask your question. Shoot.
Yeah.
Sir, you brought up a number of questions upon the house. So, sir, one of your questions was how will there be a proper method and what will the necessary act, how will the necessary actions be taken? Sir, I question upon that. Sir, have you heard of the phrase necessity is the mother of all invention? Sir, the minute rehabilitation, among all other factors, is taken to be the only point in consideration, automatically every person in the entire prosecution system will be striving towards a perfected system. So why not work to make lives of those criminals better by making them
Thank you.
better?
That's it. From next time onwards, try to keep your question short because you are repeating the crux of the question twice or thrice. Because the try to aim what you need and try to just keep it to that. Thank you. Yeah, your answer.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. Thank you for your question. Sir, I'd like you to consider that the issue here is not just innovation. The issue here is also finances and other resources necessary for possibly enforcing these methods that you suggest shall come up. Let us assume that a method is invented or discovered to ensure that these people do not return to their previous criminal lives. Such a method would almost surely involve huge amounts of financial expenditures on the part of the state and therefore on part of the taxpayers. Therefore, sir, you're essentially asking the taxpayers to pay money so that they pay money when they pay money for something where there is no security of their, where there's no certainty that their security shall be maintained, because no method in the world can possibly be impenetrable. There has to be at least a single loophole.
Right.
And
I think that we have a 45-second limit on the question on the response time, and yes, I think you've adequately answered the question. So I hope that answered it for you too, Orithro. With that being said, Ishan, why don't you move ahead with yours?
I have a simple question for you, Ayon. The kind of arguments that you proposed, don't you feel that you are proposing a model wherein mistakes are not forgiven by the society or mistakes are not forgiven by the law? You're talking about consequences, you're talking about havoc, and you're proposing a model wherein they're kept in jail. Okay, they're kept to their sentence. But it potentially proposes a model wherein you're not forgiving mistakes. So how would you justify this?
I couldn't hear the last part of your question. Could you please repeat
How
it
do you
once?
how do you justify a model wherein mistakes are not forgiven by the society, by the law, etc.?
Right. Uh, I will admit that yes, this is a system which might not be approaching mistakes very kindly. But let me also say that one, as I mentioned in my speech, rehabilitation is not eliminated as a possibility. Rehabilitation is kept as a possibility, but it is not indiscriminately used. It is used when the mistake or when the crime is such that it will not be repeated again, and the criminal is such that they will not repeat that crime again. In the sole cases of those criminals who are observed to have tendencies of repeating crimes, in only these cases will rehabilitation be replaced by punishment. I hope that answers your question.
Right, fair enough. Okay, but we can move on to the next speaker, Suryansh.
Okay. Fair enough. So with that being said, we should move on to the next speaker, which is the speaker from side proposition. Being the last speaker, Ishan, you have 4 minutes on the clock. Are you ready?
Yes, I am.
Right. Well, proceed when you want.
Right. Very good evening to everyone present here. Today, my previous speaker raised more questions than arguments, and I'd be happy to answer them. And what I would like to say in the very onset of my speech is the fact that today the opposition has been a representation of the fact that society, the law, they cannot forgive mistakes. We are looking at a degree of mistakes which ranges from minimal mistakes of the society to the largest of the mistakes, which leads to criminal sentencing. But what none of the speakers have done till now is basically setting the parameters. So let me move on with setting the parameter for today's debate. The opposition's argument today has been and will be about the fact that not considering rehabilitation as a process is only and only because the ex-convict will not be able to reintegrate into the society. And reintegration into the society, ladies and gentlemen, is completely a subjective domain wherein it completely depends on the texture of the society, right? You cannot make blanket statements of generalization on the fact whether people can reintegrate into the society or not, which is the basic motto of rehabilitation. Moving on, at the very onset of today's debate, starting with criminals, starting with prisoners, convicts, anyone who has committed any act which deviates from the social norms of today's society is looked down upon. Society, ladies and gentlemen, makes it inherently difficult for reintegration of those ex-convicts who are actually making an effort to reintegrate and forget what, and actually making an effort to reintegrate and leaving no other option but punishment. That is why rehabilitation does not exist in a safe space for rehabilitation does not exist in society today. But what fosters the proposition's case today is the fact that society today is becoming tolerant. How I propose this is the fact that with the advent of social media, the stigma that surrounds these convicts, these ex-convicts, etc., we are increasingly becoming a more aware populace, wherein people are actually understanding that these individuals or these ex-convicts are making an effort to reintegrate into the society, number one, and number two, that mistakes can be forgiving. They are putting themselves into the shoes of the person, and they're actually understanding how and why they should help them reintegrate. Moving on, to understand why I propose that rehabilitation should be the only consideration for criminal sentencing is if we make a comparison between Italy and India. Right now, in Italy, it is said in the constitution that punishment cannot consist of anything or any treatment that is contrary to human dignity and must aim at rehabilitation. Now, why I say that in Italy, the rate of reoffending is actually comparatively very low in the international forum is because the society is conditioned to do so. Right? The society is conditioned in that way that reintegration is easier and thus rehabilitation can prosper. Moving on, today's debate cannot be a representation of India, because even if an ex-convict is on the verge of reintegration into society, an individual who recently got bail would want the nation to know as to why that is happening. So why rehabilitation is actually important and why it should be considered on a sole basis is because punishment is a much worn out concept today, right? Punishment has been used for ages and ages and has fetched not so, right, 30 seconds, not so glorious or glamorous results. Now what we are moving towards is a rehabilitative society, or rehabilitation to be considered on a sole basis. The argument that I propose is pretty simple, where people need to understand that it is rehabilitation of these convicts have an almost reciprocal relationship with the society, wherein all I'm proposing is the fact that society is increasingly becoming aware, and slowly, day by day, rehabilitation, if not now, will definitely be the sole consideration for criminal sentencing in the future.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Ashan. That was your time. We will take 2 questions in the speech. Is there anyone with a question? Is there no one with a question? Arthur, do you have a question?
Not really. I think that was pretty well rounded, and I wouldn't have any questions.
Right. Now, seeing as there are no questions upon his speech, we will not be taking any more, and Ishan will be marked fully on his refutations.
And also, like Suryan, judges, the question asked by judges doesn't affect the marking of the participants, right?
If I don't think it does, it's only for us.
All right. Yeah, it should not as well. So makes
Yeah.
sense, because it's a participant versus
Yeah,
participant.
exactly.
Right.
Right.
So yeah, I'd still not ask a question anyway. we can move on to the next speaker.
Right.
With your...
Therefore, we shall now go back to side opposition, wherein we have, I believe, Nirupam as our next speaker.
Yeah.
Right. Nirupam, it's also Nirupam's first time on in this debate, so welcome, Nirupam. Nirupam, you have 4 minutes on the clock. The floor is yours.
All right. So the motion for today is that this House believes that rehabilitation should be the only condition in criminal sentencing. And I, as a member of the opposition, will be speaking against the motion. Now, the motion states that rehabilitation should be the only consideration, and emphasis on the word only. First off, I want the House to take into consideration what exactly prison, as a system of punishment after a person has committed a crime, should be focused on. And it is one thing only: cleansing of such people from the society. A prison doesn't and shouldn't focus on so much on one particular person, when the job of a sentence is to teach the criminal a lesson and get him out of jail as not necessarily a more moral or a more educated or a more mentally stable person, but as a person who is fit for society, in the sense that the crimes he has committed will not be repeated by him again. Now, the proposition needs to understand the basic fact that there's some crimes which deserve rehabilitation and some crimes which simply do not. Their stance of the motion proves is supposed to prove that rehabilitation should be the only way in order to tackle such crimes. Rehabilitation works mostly on people who say haven't lost their sanity or haven't become manic with problems in their lives, which forces them to take it out all in the form of crime. The burden on the opposition today is to prove that rehabilitation should not be the only consideration in criminal sentencing. And I completely agree on the fact that there are some crimes for which rehabilitating the criminal seems to be the best option as well. But the proposition is making a very flowery picture of the crime that are happening around the world nowadays. There are children who are killed on the streets. There are children who are sexually harassed. There are cases of sexual harassment. There are cases of mass killings. There are cases of school shootings. And let me remind the House that cases such as these always get the criminal a lifetime sentence, even in a realistic situation. Now, why I am pointing this out to the House is for the proposition and the House to understand the fact that such people are never ever going to be fit for society again. The criminal system believes that, evidently. I'm sure the people believe that, people of the nation believe that. And by the end of today's debate, I hope the proposition realizes the fact that what they're bringing out is absolutely baseless. Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, understand the fact that the proposition is literally trying to say that a person who was manning enough to sexually harass a child is going to be fixed by simple therapy. And I want to see the proposition try and defend this one statement which they imply. I cannot believe that the proposition is even trying to imply the fact that these people should even be given a second chance at life. These people who have scarred other people's lives to such extents that they might as well have killed the entire family of the kid instead of just that one kid at the school shooting. These people who have killed on the inside the person they have sexually harassed, the mental trauma, the scar on the dignity of oneself. There's crimes such as killing, and then there's crimes like this which kill the person on the inside even if he or she somehow has survived. And the proposition is trying to say, and what the proposition is trying to say is to give these criminals therapy sessions and meditation classes. Seriously. Now, as the ending note of my speech, I'd like to ask the proposition that if there's crimes for which even the people and the system and the government and the judiciary and the lawmakers believe that the only viable punishment is, say, death sentence or lifetime imprisonment, how does the proposition justify, say, the Delhi rape and murder case of 2012, for which the criminals were hanged just this year in March? And if they believe that, and do they believe that rehabilitation would just have done just as well? How does the proposition go against the plea of the whole nation of India when the nation signed petitions for the hanging of these four criminals? How does the proposition go against what the people wanted and what the judiciary and the criminal system did, that is, hang the criminals in this year's month of March? Thank you very much.
Right. With 15 seconds left in your speech, thank you very much, Nirupam. That was his speech. We will now take two questions from the speakers. We'll take a question first from Pushkar, followed by Ishan. Pushkar, you may proceed.
Right. So during your speech, in many cases, you talked about the people's wishes, the judiciary's wishes, and so on. Isn't that an appeal to popularity, argumentum ad populum? That's a logical fallacy. How can you incorporate in your argument, or making an appeal to emotion? Emotions don't decide solutions. You cannot just make a statement which will target our emotions and which will try to get an inconvenient response. That's simply not the way to argue. How would you respond to this?
Good question.
I'm not trying to target emotions. I'm trying to target the practical solution. emotions would be going and saying that the people who have committed such heinous crimes could actually be rehabilitated. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that these people who have committed sexual harassment, rapes of children of ages below 10, these people cannot be rehabilitated. That's not emotion. That's a hardcore solution. And that's the hardcore solution of punishment which should be given to these people.
Any other questions for Nirupam?
Yes, there is, I think, one more from Ishan. Ishan, go ahead.
Right. Nirupam, you are aware of the fact, right, that rehabilitation extends only till the point wherein it does not extend to rarest of the rarest cases. And cases like rape, cases like sexual harassment are rarest of the rarest cases wherein rehabilitation is not considered. So today's debate's ambit is not extending to rarest of the rarest cases, right? Whenever there comes in rehabilitation and criminal sentencing, the ambit is restricted. So how would you respond to this?
I think the proposition's forgotten their motion, the thing that they have to defend. It's that the rehabilitation should be the only solution. And
Yeah, but just a
only
question to
covers.
Sorry,
Suryansh.
Ishan, I
No
think I'm
interruption, no
afraid I have to
interruption.
stop you there because since you were talking about conventional rules, I don't think like that kind of a
I'm
correspondence.
asking the judges.
Right.
Oh yeah, what did you ask? The
What's your
motion
question?
is the motion reads.
Wait, before that, Nirupam, why don't you finish your answer?
Yeah, what I was trying to say is that the proposition seems to have forgotten their motion, which they're trying to defend. The motion states the word only. Rehabilitation should be the only consideration for criminal offenses.
Right. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
so that's my
Yes,
answer.
Right.
because
Now,
the motion
Ishan, did you
is
have a clarification?
only consideration.
Right. I do.
Right. Go ahead.
In no way do I understand how this is deviating. I am absolutely aware of the
That
motion.
is right.
I'm
Right.
just saying
That
that it is an ambit deviation because rehabilitation it's a logical fallacy. Rehabilitation does not apply to the rest of
Don't
his
worry. I
cases.
see what you mean. That I think Arth also understands
Absolutely.
by this. I think we are both competent enough to understand whether it is a fallacy or not. So we
Thank
will
you.
check
Thank you.
and
And,
respond to that.
Ishan, at the same time, you basically said that in a very improvised manner of language, you said that rape is an exception to the rehabilitation case, right? Is that what you said?
Rehabilitation does not extend to the rarest of the rarest cases because punishment is what they have, right, for the rarest of the rarest cases. Okay, so it does
Right.
not extend to the rarest of the rarest cases. So today's ambit is
I
only
absolutely
till the
get it.
point.
I absolutely get it. But when you argue it with Nirupam, Nirupam basically says that the motion says that rehabilitation is the only consideration, which means that the motion debates the idea in a perspective which says that there is no other solution other than rehabilitation for whatever crime be it. That is his belief. So we take that into account. We take
Okay,
also
okay.
your belief.
If Nirupam feels for whatever crime, it's his interpretation, right?
No,
Right, I
actually,
get it.
the motion reads
Yeah.
only consideration. We do get it. We do get Nirupam's point. It's a very fair point, to be honest. But we also understand,
Where you're
you know,
coming. Yeah.
ethics of debating and how debate functions in general. And some motions are like this, but as debaters, we cannot help because today Nirupam would have also been placed on the other side of the coin, and he would have been forced to make points which are not
Exactly.
really motion, but you can interpret the motion in your own way. That's the beauty of debating.
Okay, I
So,
mean,
that is there. So I also understand what Ishan is trying to bring up. I also understand what Nirupam is trying to bring up. And both of you are correct, but
that's all I want. That's all I
in
want.
both
Thank you.
ways. So I'm really sorry if that wasn't satisfying enough. We can
Right.
move on to the next.
Right, fair enough. After which we now have Pushkar, because we don't have another speaker from side proposition. We'll wrap it up with the last speaker of side opposition. We have finally Pushkar Pandey. Pushkar, welcome, and you may begin.
Right. So speakers before me have already discussed the word only in the motion. Those who argue that, okay, that in some, that rehabilitation is not applied in all cases, in exceptions like rape, this motion says should be the only consideration. It's not about the current status, whether it's extended to all crimes or not. What the motion is trying to ascertain, whether it should be extended to all cases or not. That is what it's trying to say. Any attempts to negate this fact is sophistry at its best. I think that extreme motions are sometimes defensible, but it is not defensible in this case. Now, proponents of this motion who use philosophical arguments will tend to make two types of arguments, or both. The rehabilitation model makes sense only if criminal behavior is caused by external factors and not merely a free-willed rational choice. If you wish to assert that it should only be rehabilitation, what rehabilitation aims to do is to give circumstances and situation to the criminal so that he changes his mind or his psyche. Those who support this argument have to be hardcore determinists who assert that whatever we do is invariably, for all of us, not out of our own volition, but due to factors beyond our control. And I think this robs all moral and ethical choices of any sort of meaning. The implications of this assertion needs to be understood. Moreover, those who will quote popular philosophers like Sam Harris to say that free will does not exist fail to realize that philosophers also argue that free will is possible and compatible with determinism. It is called compatibilism. And we don't know if determinism is true. I'm not a scientist, so I cannot comment in detail, but free will can be compatible with determinism, and determinism isn't necessarily true. So I think that if free will and rational choices exist, then we should attribute value to moral and ethical choices. If you take a hardcore determinist viewpoint, well, good luck with that. You cannot defend that position. Secondly, some people have spoken in favor of the proposition, let's say, talk about how retribution itself is bad. Like it's punishment for a crime and that we should seek to forgive. I agree. We should seek to forgive if it is practical. But this motion is trying to assert that rehabilitation should be the only consideration in criminal sentencing. I think if it would be reframed to see that prudence, what is prudential, what is practical, and not our archaic divine notions of justice, that should be what the criminal sentencing is predicated upon, then I will agree with that. But there's a rehabilitation per se, which is a very explicit procedure which needs to be used in order to tackle crime. I think that for someone to propose this motion, the burden of proof lies on them to assert that rehabilitation works in every case. You cannot just engage in sophistry by, okay, this motion is not defensible, so I'll modify it to make it defensible and then present that argument. This is a very extreme position and such sophistry cannot be allowed. You might have to incarcerate certain prisoners who cannot be reformed. You cannot talk about rehabilitation then. You have to talk about what is prudential as opposed to what our notion of justice are. Some criminals do it out of instinct, biological instinct, and society must be protected from them. We can't be sitting here in our privileged areas where we call the police and then the police will come and protect us. We have to look at the macro, all the macro level impacts which such decisions will have. Now, people that try to create a false dichotomy, which is another fallacy, rehabilitation versus retribution. I reject this fallacy outright. I am saying rehabilitation is not universally applicable. Retribution must not be used, but it should be based on what is prudential. Instead of simply going on a tirade and asking questions such as, don't you think that your viewpoint will create a society which does not forgive crimes? This is just blatant sophistry. This does not address the question. Is rehabilitation going to work always? For that, you have to believe in a hardcore determinist viewpoint, which is not backed. And you have to prove that as a prudential, from a utilitarian perspective, is rehabilitation going to work always? I think that the evidence is clear that some people are beyond being rehabilitated, and in such case, this proposition falls down. It cannot be defended. Thank you.
Right, fair enough. Thank you for your speech, Pushkar. You ended right on time. And we will now take a question. We will take two questions. Is there anyone with a question? Ishan, is there a question? Your hand is raised. Okay. So do you have a question or was that just a smile? Okay, go ahead.
Okay, that was a good speech, I must say. But tell me something. It's not related to anything else. Now, just tell me your comments on the fact. Number one, if rehabilitation is not an all-rounded concept which is always applicable, do you feel punishment is an all-rounded concept which is always applicable? Number one. And number two, do you feel that conditioning of the society is an important factor when it comes to rehabilitation and punishment, or whether it can just act as isolated instruments of jurisprudence which can be imposed on the society?
Okay, well, first of all, I think that punishment cannot be universally applied. In fact, I'd argue that the scope for punishment would, I think, be less as opposed to rehabilitation. But again, this motion is framed in such a way that it is the burden is on you to prove that it is universally applicable and not on me to prove that any other alternative is universally applicable. There's no burden of proof on me. The burden of proof lies on the proposition. Second point, I think that people should be more forgiving and more kind to recognize that people can change. I agree there. No argument there. But again, what you fail to see is that this in no way contradicts my argument. It only helps me to express my views. This is not contradicting my argument. I think I agree that people should change their outlook towards looking at, okay, that this person may have committed a crime, hate the sin, not the sinner. Fair enough. These are all such cliches and cliched statements which I think actually have some merit. But that aside, I think that society should change and the notion of punishment should be reduced, but it cannot be universally applied. I think that sufficiently answers the question.
I think it sufficiently did. Is there anyone else with a question? Right. Seeing as there is none, Arth, do you have a question or shall we start wrapping up?
I think we can start wrapping up. I won't.
All right, fair enough. With that, we have come to an end to today's debate. Now, before Arth and I say a few words, we will quickly tabulate our results and we will come back after a quick break. All right, guys, we're back. Arth and I have tabulated the results, but first, Arth, why don't you say what you saw in today's debate and give the speakers some valuable feedback.
Absolutely. So first, I'll start with Orithro. If you can have your video switched on, please. Like, yeah. So firstly, I felt that there was a problem with the structure of your speech because in a lot of places you were like now this is coming up now. All if you have a set structure for your speech, use lines like furthermore, use lines like my next argument aims to explain, my next argument is this. Moving on, use terms like this, which will increase the efficiency of the structure of your speech. And when you have the structure of your speech ready, you will never forget what you have to say because you know how to introduce every argument. That's important. Moving on to Oyon. Oyon, I thought that yes, you did work from the last time when I saw you. You definitely have come a long way with regard to your structure, with regard to your delivery. And there's a reason I remember you. That's all I have to say. With regard to Ishan, Ishan, yeah, your structure was fine. I personally felt that you could have been like comparative analysis from your previous performances in these performances. You could have been, what I felt was your style has changed. It has made you more calm, which is absolutely very nice. But the thing is, there was something about your style which used to captivate, which was captivating to me. So I feel you can work on bringing that back, which you had, basically a loud voice, a little loud voice, a little aggression, approaching the motion with the aggression, basically what you usually do. And with regard to Nirupam, your content was absolutely on point. And you were one of the only speakers who approached the rape idea, and you interpreted the motion in your own style, which was very appreciated. And to like something which is for like the entire house also, for Nirupam especially, what you lacked in was you can improve signposting in your speech. Now, what is signposting? You have to interlink all the arguments with a proper structure. When you gave away one argument, then you introduced the next argument, it felt so abrupt that there was no structure. It was hitting the ear. So that could have been done in a better manner. Pushkar, your content was good. Your witty, I appreciate your witty take on the motion, but sometimes what happens is you need to, like, I personally feel that you can improvise on what you think is witty, because you can have better jokes, you can have better interactive lines per se. And with regard to your delivery, if there is one thing you lacked behind on today, that has to be delivery. So you can work on your delivery. And to all of you, humor and all, I don't really believe in that. Always, it's not required. It's your personal choice. It's your personal style. But try to improvise the structure of your speeches, because how you introduce an argument is really, really important in a debate. And the signposting thing. Interlink your arguments. Don't make it too abrupt. If you make it too abrupt, I will lose out the attention that you have already created on me. So, for example, if you tell me a point and if you tell me, furthermore, I automatically listen to you. And you also know how you bring up the point, right? So, for example, if you want to differentiate between something, you can say something like, my ultimate argument aims to to draw a line, or to differentiate between these two things. These these sentences, these opening sentences help a lot. So that would be my feedback for today's day. Without further ado, I ask Suryansh to
May I
give a
ask a question, please?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Sir, what would you say like about my content? Like you mentioned the content for everyone, but in my case, you mentioned the oratory and delivery, and okay, but how? What would you do? Is there anything to improve upon in the content department for me?
There is, for everybody, for no matter how big the debater is, there is always there is scope for improvement. Always, one debate you don't, one debate you lack on research, one debate you don't. So I can't say that as a debater you lack on research, but I have to say that in this particular debate, maybe you did not do that well on the research front. But with regard to your performance in general, I didn't think that your content was bad. It was good. It can be improvised. Everybody's content can be improvised, no matter how good the speech is. But compared to others, your content, yeah, it maintained the standard. That's all I have to say.
Right. Thank you very much, Arth. I think Arth pretty much covered everything I had to say and more. But if there's something I would like to highlight, it's that I felt that in terms of structure, I felt that I wanted to point out Pushkar. I felt that as compared to the multiple debates I've really witnessed on this platform, I felt that your structure really stood out to me because one thing that I really look out for in a speaker is to when you're debating the motion, what you did was not just look at, oh, what does the judiciary say, what rule says this, what article says this. You actually looked at it from the moral point. You looked at it, this should be this, or how you would argue this from different perspectives, how you brought that in. I find that to be probably the most holistic way in which a motion should be debated, and which is what I liked about your speech, because you were the only person who did it that way and that way only. And I felt that your structure, the way you put forward your points, was probably one of the best ones I've seen on this platform. And I feel that as Arth very rightly pointed out, because it's your first time here, I wanted to mention you itself. It's that your delivery can have some work, because if there's one area that you lacked on the mark sheet which didn't allow you to have a better result today, it's that your delivery was fell a little shorter as compared to the others. As you know, Arthur was saying, have that little bit of an aggressive tone. Your rhetorics, your wit, I really loved it. I was laughing every time you cracked a joke. But then again, I felt that if you, while cracking those jokes, suddenly you brought back the serious aspect and put your foot down, that would have really worked in your favor, because from what it seems, you were pretty confident with your content. So with a little here and there, it could improve by leaps and bounds. That being said, we'll move on to the results. Arth, why don't you give out the awards?
All right. So regarding the awards, I'll just give away uh, something. It was very, very, extremely, very, very close. Uh, And with regard to the thing, with regard to the marking of individual speeches, now see, our opinions differ as individuals, Suryansh's opinion and my opinion. So what we did was we added the cumulative scores. And when we talk about the balance of both the scores, uh, on that regard, the second best speaker of the day goes to Nirupam Biswas. If you can just unmute. And if everybody can have a round of applause for Nirupam, please.
Right. Congrats, Nirupam. And yeah, go ahead with the best.
Yeah, the best speaker for the day. Uh, I just told this particular debater that you are not winning today, and that is Ishan Banerjee, the best speaker for the day.
Right. Congratulations, Ishan. From judge to debater, I think you've transcended both those aspects. So, congratulations, Ishan.
Also, Suryansh, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry that I have to interrupt that interesting conversation. But before we get done with the results, I'd like to say that Oyon and Pushkar, both
Right.
of you,
Yes.
and like you all together were close to each other. You all were close to Nirupam. You all were close to Ishan as well. So it was a very thin contest, and all of you did well. This was perhaps one of the most compact debates hosted by the floor is yours, because all five of you, in fact, have maintained a good standard. I can't say that anyone was bad, and in most of the debates, I can openly call people bad, but this case was different, and good job on that one.
Yeah.
So that's
And I
can.
think if Arth is comfortable with it, I'm going to tell you how close it was. It was so Ishan was about 2 marks ahead of Nirupam, who was a mark and a half ahead of Pushkar, as Pushkar and Ayon who tied, and the two of them were 1 mark ahead of Orithro. So that is how contested today's debate was. And when it came to Pushkar and Ayon, what separated them was Pushkar had amazing structure, and Oyon had amazing eloquence, and his delivery was phenomenal. And if one person was good at this, another person was better at this, and that is probably what made this so competitive. It's that different people brought different aspects of the debate, different aspects of a adequate debater into it. So this came out to be a very well-rounded debate, for which I commend each and every one of you. So to conclude, this has been enough of colloquially our two paisa gyan. Uh,
Also, Suryansh, one last sentence.
yes, go ahead.
To most of you, to most of the people who debate here, I have spent a considerable amount of my life behind MUNs. Don't use the MUN style of speech in the debate style of speech, because most of the MUNers who claim to be the best can't debate for shit, right? Can't debate for shit. So try not to follow what they set in front of you, because debate is different. I'm not saying MUN as a practice is bad, but MUN is different to debating. So try to draw the line between both of the things, because in debate, definitely your speeches are technical, very technical, but there has to be that captivating thing, which most of you understand. Like, you all need to draw the line between a debate and a Mauldinian conference, because both have their own time, both have their own places per se. So yeah, that's there. So that's it. Just that's it. Suryansh, you can
And
continue.
just one last line, that Arth Agarwal is the most legendary MUN of the circuit and has been a much celebrated debater of the circuit as well. So that two paisa gyan and his declaration was just for modesty. He is actually a legendary debater and MUN. So Suryan should know better.
Yeah,
As to,
I
I
don't
mean,
disagree. I agree with that statement. Right. Without further
MUN in the Calcutta circuit is synonymous to Arth Agarwal. So
right. Fair enough. Thank
good
you.
Minus
debate.
Calcutta
Thank you so
School.
much.
Yeah.
Minus
Yeah.
Calcutta
Thank
School.
you so much. Thank you so much.
Right. So to
All right.
conclude, thank you all. Thank you all for joining in. Thank you for taking time out. I hope you guys show your
Also,
faces.
a huge round of applause for, if you can unmute and just have a round of applause for Suryansh, because I personally have been seeing him. He, like a lot of people, have said a lot of things about this idea in general. But what I liked about him was he gathered the entire city despite the pandemic. And actually, this is how we started trying out online debates in Calcutta. And I feel that it's great, because he since then he has not stopped organizing online debates despite his busy schedule. Like, it's not easy to bunk your weekend plans and come here, give 2 hours every day, because no matter, every all faces change, all faces change. If there is one face which remains constant, it's his face. And after each and every weekend, if he has to come and host debates, sacrificing his weekend plans, I do think that that deserves a round of applause. Because if I were in his place, I would have never sacrificed my weekday plans, let alone weekend plans. So a round of applause for him.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your words, Arth. And yeah, I mean, it's fun for me to do this. So, I mean, weekend plans wise, I think this is probably one of my more fun plans. So, well, you guys coming here makes it all the more better. So, thank you guys for joining in. And as I always conclude by saying, that's what that was.